Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to HPANWO TV and welcome to 2023. Well, actually, this is my second video of 2023, but it's been a few days into 2023. It's not just after the new year. Also, to be honest, you probably noticed I actually shot that video the day before New Year's Eve. That was the UFO disclosure one for 2023. Well, seeing as it's 2023, I've got a new video. It's been a few days since I did the last one. Oh, by the way, ironically, I might... Things are developing a bit in the UFO disclosure field. I might have to do another one very soon. But seeing as it's been a few days since the last video and we're in a new year, I thought I might try something new. Now, this is not completely new because this is, of course, a watch party, and I've done a number of them. It's a new it's a new sort of format. I started, if you remember, in January last year, a year ago, with Soylent Green, because of course 2022 was Soylent Green year. And I thought it went down so well. I enjoyed it so much, and you viewers enjoyed it so much. I kept doing them through the year, didn't I? I think I did about a dozen during the year. And I thought I'd continue, but this one is a watch party. It's going to be slightly different. It is a watch party, but also a read party. It's watch and read, or read. What I'm going to do for this particular party is it's going to be a watch party, because I'm going to ask you, the viewers, to watch a film, and we're going to review that film just like we did with the watch parties from last year. But I'm also going to ask you to read the book from which the film was adapted, and the book I'm talking about is this one, Inferno by Dan Brown. There's the back cover, Seek and Ye Shall Find. There you go. It's there's the spine. Seek and Ye Shall Find. It's a book by Dan Brown, and it's been adapted into a film by Ron Howard. The book was written in 2013. The film came out 3 years later, 2016. Ron Howard, of course, has adapted... that's the third adaptation by Ron Howard of Dan Brown's works. He also did Angels and Demons, and before that, originally, he did the Da Vinci Code. Now, I first got the idea to read this book when, if you remember, it was actually during the review of that little old tech exclusive I did, which I can't really talk about much on YouTube, but basically it was a little review of the film Expired Without Warning. And if you go to BitChute, Odyssey, or Rumble, you'll see it on my channel there. But the actor from the film Inferno, Tom Hanks, appears in an interview in that particular film, in that particular documentary, and he mentions the film he's involved with called Ron Howard's Inferno. Now, the reason I want to review the book and the film, the reason firstly I want to review this entire story, book and film, is because it has some very, very HPANWO-esque themes in it. I'd say even more so than the Da Vinci Code. I mean, the Da Vinci Code was a great book, which I enjoyed very much and was very in vogue at the time. And the film was very, very good. It was a very good film that Howard made of it. But this is the third instalment in the Robert Langdon series that Brown wrote. Then there was Angels and Demons, then he did the Da Vinci Code, then there was this one, then Origins. I've not read all Origins or watched the film. I don't think there was a film yet. And this one, I think, has even more HPANWO-esque themes, of a darker kind than the Da Vinci Code. In fact, I've got a feeling I might have to make the review of this read watch party an old tech exclusive. I might not be able to do it on YouTube. As for the live stream, it's about time I started doing Odyssey live streaming anyway, so I might have to make it an Odyssey live stream. But what I'm going to do is, first of all, because it is a review and watch party. I'm not just asking you to go off and watch a film. Well, you can if you like. It's up to you. I'm also asking if you read a book as well. I'm going to leave it a little bit longer than I normally do for watch parties before I do the review and live stream. Rather than leaving it like a week or 2 weeks, I'm going to leave it maybe 2 months, 3 months, something like that, maybe longer, because it takes longer to read a book than it does to to watch a film, and I do want you to read the book too. It's up to you. I mean, you can. There's three ways you can take part in this watch and read party. You can read the book and then take part in the live stream and watch the review and take part in the live stream. You can watch the film and then take part in the live stream and watch the review, or you can do both, and I've done both. If you do both, I do recommend reading the book first. I recommend reading the book first. There's several reasons for this. Firstly, that books are usually better. Books are usually better, and then this Inferno is definitely, the book is definitely better. Also, like, what I find is if you watch the film adaptation first and read the book, inevitably. Now, this comes down to this is interesting actually. This is connected to my trip to York. When I am reading a book, I don't know about you, when I'm reading a book, I can see it all in my head. I can see everything in my head. The characters appear in my head. Sometimes they look like real people I know. Sometimes they look like famous celebrities. Sometimes their voice and faces are completely new, and I've just imagined them. Or they're combinations of people I know. I'm almost adapting it into a movie in my mind. And the problem is, if I watch a film first, inevitably that internal mind movie is moulded by the film I've just seen, and I don't want that. With Dan Brown, I've always read first, watched later. Read first, watched after. With the Da Vinci Code, the first book, I read the book, then I watched the film. The book was excellent, and the film was also very good. Angels and Demons, both. I didn't enjoy the book or the film. And of course this I enjoyed both, but the book is better. There is a connection to my trip to York. I won't go into that right now, but there's a bit of an amusing connection to my trip to York when I was reading this book by Dan Brown, Inferno. I won't go into it's actually personal between myself and someone else, so I'll discuss it with them privately. But Dan Brown actually could write a book set in York. I mean, the thing about Dan Brown is is his books are very interesting. Now he's one of the most successful authors in the world, actually. I mean, he's been overtaken by old J.K., I think, but he's certainly probably second or third. His books are very fast-paced, very, very fast-paced thrillers, and they're action-packed, and they usually involve chases and running around and people fleeing from someone, and the themes in them are very often esoteric. Often they involve Christian theology, other forms of theology and philosophy, and also they take place in famous places in the world, which allows. It's almost like, in fact, these books, like this book in particular, more than the others, I think, read almost like a tour guide. It takes place mostly in Florence. And Dan also sets his books in other classic places and cities around the world. So, for example, the Da Vinci Code, of course, set in Paris and London. Angels and Demons was set in Rome. This was set partly in Florence, but also in a couple of other cities as well. Mostly in Florence, this is set. And when you read through it, it's almost like he talks like a tour guide. He's obviously visited these places and he's looked into the history. And of course, in Florence, there's a huge amount of history to do with art, to do with ancient kings and queens and doges and things like that. So very, very, it's interesting from that point of view, and that would always appeal to Americans who love that kind of thing with Europe. They love Europe in that respect. As they're fast-paced, and as I said, the only ones I've read so far are the three Robert Langdon novels. Three of the up to now 4 Robert Langdon novels. Now, Robert Langdon, of course, one of the reasons I don't want to watch the film is because I think Tom Hanks is a lousy Robert Langdon. In my mind, Langdon has never looked like Tom Hanks. In my mental movie, in fact, he looks very much like the actor who played. He was in that film about Borley Rectory. That new one that came out a couple of years ago. The guy who plays Harry Price, he's a very good actor. My Robert Langdon sort of has long white hair. He's not he's not quite as young as the Tom Hanks version, and he's more sort of bookish. He's got an English accent, speaks with an English accent, even though Robert Langdon is American, of course. But in my mental movie, that doesn't matter. Um, yeah, so the Da Vinci Code was. I mean, I don't know. See, the Da Vinci Code was the book. It was the big book, wasn't it? If you remember. I mean, I didn't. I don't know if I ever did a. Am I still recording? Yes, I am. I'm just checking. Just doing a sound test. Yes, I am. Yeah, that sounded a bit weird, didn't it? I'm not supposed to go. I'm supposed to go testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. Anyway, that it's gone a bit out of fashion now, but it's the Rennes le Chateau mystery. When I first started getting into woo woo stuff, I really got into the Rennes le Chateau mystery. I first read about it actually in David Icke's The Biggest Secret, but I went out and got Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and when that came out in 1982, that was when Lincoln Bagent and Lee published this book. It was a big sensation. I was way too young in those days to take an interest. I was only a little kid, but I did read it when I got into the David Icke forum and things like that, and yeah, fascinating stuff. And then when Dan Brown came, I'm sure the people of Rennes le Chateau must be so fed up. They really must be. Rennes le Chateau is a tiny little place. It's literally got a population of about 150 people. Tiny little place. Just check I'm still framed all right. Yeah, minuscule little place in the south of France. Charming little village. It's now. It suddenly became a massive tourist attraction because of this book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, about the Rennes le Chateau mystery, Father Saunière, Berenger Saunière, and his secret, and things like that, and the famous Zodiac and stuff like that, and the whole region became inundated by tourists, and this was one of the first great woo-woo tourist phenomena. It was about that time, that the Roswell mystery was gathering pace, and of course Roswell in the 1980s, Roswell became a bit of a tourist attraction as well because of the book by Charles Berlitz and Bill Moore, and of course all the other books that came out after that by Stanton Friedman and so many other people. How many books have been written about Roswell now? But yeah, I think Rennes le Chateau was kind of the first great woo-woo tourist phenomenon. And I bet that probably local people in Rennes le Chateau, I don't know specifically, but they must have thought, what the hell's going on? This was a little village in the middle of nowhere. We had a peaceful life. 150 people just herding sheep and going to church and eating truffles and drinking wine in outdoor cafes. And then suddenly I think they had up to 80,000 tourists a year at the peak. But gradually, of course, it began to die down. The Holy Blood, Holy Grail sensation died down. And then in 2003, Dan Brown comes out with Da Vinci Code, and suddenly it all kicks off again. The people at Rennes le Chateau must be cursing Dan Brown's name. And of course, Lincoln Bagent and Lee start selling. The Holy Blood, Holy Grail begins selling again. I sort of got into it that way. But I think the Da Vinci Code is a damn good book. It's a really fascinating book, and it's kind of like Dan Brown. I've been reading about Dan Brown's life actually. Where his development as a person, because he was actually already middle aged when he started writing, and he always said that he was brought up an Episcopalian American from New Hampshire, where Betty and Barney Hill lived, which is quite a sort of Christian area. And then he became like a Dawkinsian atheo-skeptico materialo humanist. And then he describes himself coming full circle because he said the more I looked into science and the deeper I got into it, it started to get more and more mushy, and eventually he developed what you might call a spiritual but not religious view of the world. And you see this actually very much, not in Angels and Demons. Angels and Demons is very much a pretty bad story actually. I don't like it very much. It involves the Large Hadron Collider and a lot of science fiction stuff about trapping antimatter and things, which is it's not done terribly well. And it's a rather simplistic story about the battle between religion and science. But the Da Vinci Code, both the book and the film, is about the battle between it's more about the battle between religion and spirituality, which of course is an underlying theme of the Holy Blood, Holy Grail. I mean, I know a lot of people consider Dan Brown pulp fiction. I mean, I was listening to an interview about pulp fiction the other day, because the word actually comes from the 1920s, when authors used to very, very cheap authors used to want to self-publish, or very, very low budget publishing houses wanted to bring out books, and they would use, after, in paper making, you get different types of paper come out, out in different parts of the process, and the very last part you get all the low quality pulp, which is made into it's like almost newsprint paper, which it doesn't last long. It yellows very quickly and falls apart. But some really cheap publishers and self-publishers use that to bring out books. This includes some quite famous authors. A lot of the original fantasy stories and science fiction stories were pulp fiction. They came out just paperbacks without a real cover. Robert E. Howard, for example. H.P. Lovecraft was a pulp fiction author, and now today it's used to designate like cheap sort of bloke lit and chick lit, which is what I suppose Dan Brown is. It is kind of bloke lit, I suppose. Although I know women like Dan Brown stories as well. It's not like Tom Clancy kind of bloke lit. It is a bit more sort of balanced than that. I hate that word balance, because when people talk about needing balance, they usually talk about banning white men. But it is more balanced. Dan Brown's more balanced than Tom Clancy. Dan Brown loved puzzles and treasure hunts all his life, and in fact, that is a theme that recurs over and over again in certainly the books I've read of his, the three that I've read of his. That of the treasure. Firstly, it's about evading capture from bad guys, and there's a lot of contradictions in plots. Bad guys turn out to be good guys turn out to be bad guys. It's almost like a detective story, the way that very often these plot twists double back on themselves, and they become sometimes it gets a bit confusing. Certainly with Inferno is the most extreme example of that. Inferno definitely has the plot twists in Inferno are like really quite extraordinary. But yeah, Dan Brown, his whole life he used to play treasure hunts and that with his family, and the treasure hunt and solving puzzles is a massive theme in the books I've read of Dan Brown's. And Robert Langdon, you see, he's what is he called? He's a symbologist and cryptologist. I don't know, there was such a subject, but he is. He knows all about hidden symbols and things like that. And the theme is, of course, Florence. As I said, it's set in Florence. It's very touristy, very historic in a sort of like American do Europe in 5 days kind of way. But the central theme is also, and it's maybe worth reading this too, and you can maybe listen to it. You can listen to it as a free audiobook as well. The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. This is a very old story. It's an epic poem from the 13th century, and indeed, and I might come back to Dante actually, because there's another film I want to do a watch party of, and someone actually requested this, and I think it's a good idea. What Dreams May Come, because that's also very heavily inspired by Dante's Divine Comedy. And that's Dante's death mask there. That was a plaster cast of his face that was made when he died, and it's in those days in the 13th century. That's the closest you could get to a photograph. Although there's lots of portraits of Dante that are very accurate and very similar to his death mask, so he has quite a lot of very realistic portraits done of himself. But he was a man who wrote this incredible poem, which is about the afterlife. It is a journey through the afterlife, through hell to purgatory, up into heaven. It's extraordinary, extraordinary imagery, quite frightening. The Inferno part, which is about hell, is terrifying, and it has shaped a lot of our popular images of the afterlife today, and the spirit world today. So that's the kind of central theme of this whole thing. Inferno, of course, is the first of the three parts of the Divine Comedy. Yeah, it's a cliffhanger. It is a cliffhanger. It's very, very thrilling. It's jam-packed with tricks. This is New York Times. Jam-packed with tricks. A book-length scavenger hunt that Mr. Brown created so energetically. Yes, he does. Now, as I said, there are HPANWO-esque themes in the book, this book and film, and very HPANWO-esque. And as I said, not of the sort of like more benign type that Philip Coppens used to get into with the Rennes-le-Château mystery. As I say, the Rennes-le-Château mystery's gone out of fashion now. I mean, the Da Vinci Code for Raw has died down, so I'm sure the people of Rennes-le-Château relieved a second time in the last few decades of that. But the Herpan West theme, I say, has a darker type of theme. And if you've watched my review of Expired Without Warning, where I got the idea to get this book and watch the film, you may guess where I'm going with this, and you may understand why it could be so dark that I can't do it on YouTube. I'm going to have to make it alt-tech only. And the reason I want this to make this a read and watch party is because the ending of the film and the ending of the book are totally different. I mean, there's a lot of differences between the book and the film. And as the film, as I said, is really not as good as the book. I don't think Howard does the book as much credit as he did with Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code was like, I'm glad I read the book first, and I've always read Brown the books before watching the films, as I said, especially with Brown. But honestly, the ending is the film I think takes an awful lot away from the book. Some of the characters are blended, some of the characters are very different. The plot is more simplistic. Maybe that's inevitable if you've got to make like an 95-minute movie. You can't make it like the movie I made in my head. However, there is the big significant difference between the book and the film with Inferno is the ending of the ending of this book is totally different to the ending of the film, and the ending of the book is a lot more unconventional. It's very unconventional, and it is extremely interesting, and I think frightening, scary. I mean, the ending of the film is much more conventional, and I must say the ending of the film is, well, I suppose if it was real, I'd want it to end the way it ended in the film, but it's more boring. It's much less to talk about. It's more like how you'd expect a cheap thriller to end. You'd expect it to end. Now, interestingly, maybe I'll come back to this because Dan Brown said he got the idea. He first got the idea for writing his stories, which he started with Angels and Demons, which was his first book. It was adapted after Da Vinci Code, but it was the first book he wrote after he read The Doomsday Conspiracy by Sidney Sheldon. Now, that's interesting because Sheldon's a good author. I've read Master of the Game. I've read what was the other one I read of his? And I read The Doomsday Conspiracy. Now, The Doomsday Conspiracy was the first time I heard about the Roswell incident, and that may have been one of the triggers that got me into woo-woo. This was sort of I read it in the late 80s, I think, The Doomsday Conspiracy. I remember because I just started importing, so it must have been after 1988. But it first got me into I was stunned when I came across this idea of an alien crash retrieval. But there are similarities, actually. The Doomsday Conspiracy is also about following clues and uncovering puzzles, and it's a race across the world and things like that. And it's also very fast-paced. Not quite as fast-paced as this book. Dan Brown's book, I say, they are action-packed. Like I say, they involve movement, action, fleeing, chasing. This book actually, the entire story of this book takes place within a single day. From start to finish. It starts in the early morning and it ends late at night on a single day, and it moves from one city to another. It moves around very quickly, so it's very fast paced. Da Vinci Code is similar. Da Vinci Code takes place in the space of 2 days. Right, just going through my notes here now. I think I've got through it all. Oh, there's another amusing thing about. I just wanted to bring this up, and I'm nearly done now. But famous authors seem inevitably to attract copyright infringement or plagiarism lawsuits. It's really strange. I don't think that could possibly happen to me. But it could. Technically, it could happen to anyone because not for copyright infringement so much, but for plagiarism. Plagiarism is where you accuse of stealing someone else's idea. Now, J.K. Rowling has been accused of that, and it almost seems to go for the par with almost every famous author. And it could happen to anyone. It could happen to me, because plagiarism is actually it's a very legally, it's a very, very fuzzy line indeed. So, for example, if you read John Christopher's Tripods trilogy, you get these aliens come down in these three-legged walking machines, right? Well, where else do you see that in science fiction? You see it earlier. These were books written in the 70s, but you see it earlier in H.G. Wells' War of the World, three-legged walking machines for aliens. I mean, does that mean that Christopher's guilty of plagiarism? Plagiarizing? Oh, is he guilty of plagiarizing H.G. Wells? Obviously it's inspiration. He's been inspired. He's inspired, and anyone who reads fantasy will very, very often come across something. If they read a load of fantasy books and then they read Lord of the Rings, they may well think, hang on a minute, this is very like Lord of the Rings. And that's not because people are copying J.R. Tolkien, it's just that Tolkien inspired so many other people to become fantasy writers. And when you read Doomsday Conspiracy, if you read Dan Brown first and you read Doomsday Conspiracy, you'll see the inspiration there, but somebody, Sheldon could technically accuse, if he wanted to, launch a lawsuit against Brown for plagiarism. And he probably wouldn't win. It's very, very, very few plagiarism lawsuits actually succeed. But almost all, if someone is rich and they're famous and from their writing, some other writer will try to they'll just suck it and see how far they get. And it's childish, it's very juvenile, it's very spiteful, it's very effeminate, and because of course all it does is it's very bitchy actually. It just gets you. It means the writer has to deal with this lawsuit and they can't write for a while. J.K. Rowling couldn't write for 3 years while she was dealing with her lawsuit. I certainly wouldn't do that to another author. The only time I would do that to another author is if they were literally copying me. If it was very obvious plagiarism, as is an open and shut case, and or they were literally breaching my copyright. That is, they were literally copying stuff that I'd done. I actually had this brief conversation with Bryce Zabel about this because, basically I got the idea to write my Roswell trilogy from a conversation that Stephen Bassett had I was listening to Stephen Bassett in an interview, and he said, "Wouldn't it be great if someone wrote an alternative history story in which the Roswell incident ended up in real disclosure?" And he says, "I won't write that book. I can't write that kind of thing, but I hope someone else does." And I thought, well, I could do it. And I wrote to Steve, and I said, "Steve, I'll write that book." And he was very encouraging. He says, "Yeah, go for it, Ben." And he has been very encouraging, even though I know he has his criticisms of my books, and I knew he would because we have our disagreements. But then I found out, Bryce Zabel, I found out he's basically doing the same thing. He's writing his own alternative history story about disclosure, and I actually wrote and I said, Bryce, I'm not copying you here. and people can write books about the same subject without copying it, and so there was a fine line between inspiration and plagiarism. The general rule is you will not be, where do you stand on this line between plagiarism and inspiration? Well, I think the answer is very simple. It's one of these rather unpleasant hypocrisies in life. Slaxer would love this. Basically, if you are a rich and famous author who's a multi-million bestseller, you'll be accused of plagiarism. If you're a pulp fiction writer who self-publishes and has cleared a couple of thousand copies like I have, it's just inspiration. The thing about Dan Brown is, though, he was sued for plagiarism. He's been sued several times for plagiarism, actually. As I said, it goes with the course, considering he's so successful. And there's a lot of spiteful, envious, bitchy people around who just say, well, why am I not a famous writer then? I don't like it. I'm triggered. I'm going to sue this person because they're famous and they're rich and I'm not. Well, I went to a writers group. I'll tell you that story another time. But I actually went to a writers circle years ago, and I met loads of people like that. But the weird thing is, one of the lawsuits against Dan Brown was by Henry Lincoln, Michael Bajan, and what's his name, Lee, the three authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, sued Dan Brown for plagiarism. Right, well, there's several absurdities in this. Firstly, the judge was so amused by the whole thing that he put his own secret code into his summary. Secondly, what the hell are they? What the hell are writers of an historical textbook, which is what Holy Blood, Holy Grail is, suing a fictional author for plagiarism? Think it over for a moment, all right? If I wanted to write a story set on one of Lord Nelson's warships, all right, I might go and I might read a biography of Lord Nelson and a history of the Napoleonic Wars and the naval battles and the Battle of Trafalgar and things like that. I might read those for research. And then I write my story about Lord Nelson's battleship and the characters in it. It's all fiction, it's all imaginary, all comes from my head. I publish the book, and then the authors of the book, the textbooks, the historical textbooks, who I used for research, then sue me for copying their idea? You can't copy somebody's idea from a historical textbook, because writers of textbooks, historical textbook, are not writing about their own ideas. They're writing about historical facts and historical analysis. Nobody owns history. If you write a science fiction book, like I read a couple of books on science and alternative science to research the Roswell trilogy. I'm doing the same now for the Obscurati Chronicles. But these, are they going to sue me because I'm using them for research? They're writing about real things, facts. Nobody owns facts. There's no copyright on facts. But I don't know. I can't help feeling this whole lawsuit, Bajan, Lee, Lincoln against Dan Brown, I can't help that they kind of conspired to do it for publicity's sake. I really can't, because it's so ridiculous. Of course it failed. It's an open and shut case. I don't know the details. I'm sure Dan Brown went into court and said, you don't own the historical facts you've talked about in the Rennes-le-Château mystery is not your creation. It's not your fictional creation. It's not your intellectual property. And so I'm not surprised that the Bajan, Lincoln and Lee lost that. Anyway, guys, so I'm going to leave this for a few months, I think. Like I said, please, my advice, I said there's three different options. Watch the film, read the book, watch the film and read the book, okay? Or read the book, watch the film. So there's four options. As I say, my recommendation is option number 4, read the book, watch the film. I think you should do that rather than watch the film, read the book, or just read the book, or just watch the film. So read the book, watch the film is my best option. Second is just read the book. Third is just watch the film. Fourth is watch the film, read the book. Because if you watch the film, read the book it'll spoil it for you. So you're better off just watching the film. That's it, guys. So there's going to be more soon. I can't believe I'm going to have to do another comments reply video soon. But anyway, 2023 is looking good so far. There's more videos coming up pretty soon. And as I said, the whole disclosure thing is literally hours after I made my last UFO disclosure video. A friend of mine sent me something. I went, oh my god. Maybe the black-pilled message in that particular video was a little premature. I'll say more about that in the future. Thank you all for watching HPANWO TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.